By the 9 and 4, welcome once more to the library. Today's entry, we are going to be covering the calendar and how Jamamar keeps track of time, along with a brief overview of the ages of Jamamar and her realms. Unlike most entries, my perceptive patrons, the first half of this entry covering the timekeeping of Jamamar will be fairly exhaustive, though short as it is not that complicated. However, for the overview of the ages, it is, as just stated, just an overview. Many more entries going far more in depth into each of these ages will be coming in the future. Now, with all of that said, let's get into the calendar and timekeeping of the realms. As noted in an earlier entry or two, Jamamar enjoys a perfect 24-hour planetary rotational cycle. Noon is always noon. This is complemented by its solar rotational period, that being a perfect 364 days. Spring is always on the first of the year, every year. Now, this 364-day year is divided into 13 months. Each of these months has 28 days and 4 weeks, which obviously comes down to 7 days a week, Monday through Sunday. Each month is a perfect 28 days as stated 4 weeks, making timekeeping and business relatively simple. The 13 months of the Jamamar calendar and the Greater Realms calendar are the following. Starting with the first month of Respi, then Soward. Gustas is next, and Pilgria follows. Bestum, Jasro, and Warcon are the 5th, 6th, and 7th months, respectively. Tronhun, Bountbas, and Motas are the 8th, 9th, and 10th months. The last 3 months of the year are Klosnias, Festivaso, and Exhuska. Now, the following does only apply to the core realm or the planet of Jamamar herself, as these are her seasons in relation to the calendar. As a note, as everything else with timekeeping of the core realm, the season is a perfect 91 days or 13 weeks. With the first day of spring being on the first day of the year, that being the first day of the first week of Respi, followed by the spring solstice on the 6th day of the 3rd week of Soward. Summer starts up on the first day of the 2nd week of Pilgria, and the summer equinox is then on the 6th day of the 4th week of Bestum, with fall beginning on the 1st day of the 3rd week of Warcon, and its solstice being on the 6th day of the 1st week of Bonfus. Winter begins on the 1st day of the 4th week of Mortas, appropriately, with the winter equinox on the 6th day of the 2nd week of Festivasal. Celestial events are observed for 3 days. Now, a bit on how the date is written within the realms. As you may have picked up from how I introduced the solstices and the seasonal beginnings, the days are written within the realms in the following format. Day of the week, followed by a slash, then the week of the month, followed by a dash, followed by the month of the year, a period, and then the year itself. A space is usually observed and the age is added for more official documents where it is applicable. Now, in general, most documents will simply have CA or current age, often being scratched out and replaced with the appropriate age name in official records later. Now, with the official timekeeping part done, let us review what these ages actually were. Again, this is just a very brief overview of them, and more will come in the future, but it would be useful for all of us to have a unified yardstick to work with. So, beginning at, well, the beginning, it should be noted that the first two ages are arguably within the period of realms history known as the Timeless Times. That is, time was not exactly a set or codified property of the realms yet, so many of the events within these two ages do seem to coincide while being distinctly different in other accounts. The following divisions are the agreed upon divisions of Time Walkers, Time Lords, and those who were there at the time. The first age being the Age of Elders. Obviously, this is when the Analar and the dragons, the elder races, were born, as well as the material and ethereal gods, and their mortal races they created. This age flows into the Age of Ascension, noted for the rise of savage and wild races, amongst them humanity, or the flame-blessed humanity, to be specific. Also within this age we see the establishments of the first kingdoms and city-states. On the higher end of the elders and those races brought forth in the previous age, they had built the expeditious fleets, and they began to venture out during this time. The next age is the First War of Feather and Scale. When the Analars and Dragons went to war, most of the mortal races were aware, but only tangentially involved in the events of the war, until closer to its end. Events during this time were the creation of the Home City, the Dragwa, the Crystons, and the infamous 36 seconds. Now, the next period of time is of note as it only appears within the records of the elder races. This is known as the Great Sundering, or the Great Work. Now, the exact details of what it was are unclear. However, the consequences and result of the actions are not. The moon Apaka disappeared. The celestial elements of Aether and Void all but vanished from the Jamamar. The Isle of the Revered, along with the honored revered themselves, disappeared. Also, by the end of the Great Work, or the Great Sundering, the dragon race themselves had been splintered and fractured, many of them bound to the halls, something that will be gone on in detail in a future entry. However, after this Great Sundering, or this Great Work, the Second War of Feather and Scale soon followed. And unlike the First War, the mortal races were not just aware of the outbreak of the Second, they took sides. They took sides, and millions died. The details of the atrocities committed by both sides have been lost to many histories, and those that exist are under the tightest seals by all parties involved. This war ended with the Analar summoning of the daemon Vanson. This act caused a taint within their race that would go unmended until their redemptions many years later at the hands of Genevieve and the V's. The next period of time is simply known as the lost years of Vanson's reign. As mentioned in an earlier entry, the exact count of these years or the events within them, it can only be speculated at, for not even the Time Walkers, Time Lords, or the Chronokami themselves venture into that period of time without great preparation and great need. So dangerous is the chaos contained within. However, after the defeat of the daemon by the original three heroes, Monroe, Vapor, and Camille, the Age of Mortals began. This age saw the younger races restore their empires, return to a normal form of life, and enjoy a mostly peaceful, yet not undangerous time, as many areas of the world were still infested with monsters. Thus, adventurers, and eventually what would become the hunters, became a normal part of Jamamar society. Following the Age of Mortals is the Age of Valor. This sees the rise of the mortal gods and their battles against Vanson's repeated attempts to return. It also sees the Analar's redemption, the creation of the nation Adelin for lycanthropes, Criterion for Crystons, the Necropolis for those undead, and the beginning of the Necropolis-Avelin War, among many, many other events. Following the Age of Valor, we see the Wars of the Spark. In this period of interdivine warfare, the material and ethereal deities, the old gods, rose up and attacked the mortal gods with intent of supplanting them and removing them as a threat. The worshippers of all deities involved engaged in warfare as well. Many years into the war, and at its end, it was discovered that much of this had been instigated by outside forces. The age after the Wars of the Spark, that short but bloody conflict in the grand scale of things, was known as the Age of Respite and Reunion. In this age, we see the rise of the Necrotai nation from the ashes of where it was thought broken back during the Wars of Feather and Scale. We also see the end of the Necropolis-Avelin War by the intervention of the very same Necrotai. We see a storm of scales of unprecedented proportion, seeing the death of one of the divines and their replacement within the Draconic Pantheon. We also see the recovery of the Revered and their island. We also see the discovery of the Expeditus Primus, foreshadowing the oncoming Age of Stars. We see the end of this age, as mentioned, with the Sky Tear incident. That brings us neatly to our current age, the Age of Stars. Within the Age of Stars, we see the discovery of the rest of the original Primus Expeditus fleet, that being the Expeditus Celestial, the Expeditus Draxus, and the Expeditus Minoris. We also see the addition to the fleet of the 3 additional ships: the Endeavor, granted to the Teltechians; the Sentinence, constructed and manned by the crafted races of the realms, that being the Crystons, the Dragwa, the Teltechians, and others, along with the Expeditus Enlightened, a bioship grown, maintained, and manned by the Enlightened races. We also see the War of the Scriptorum and their followers, the Ancient Empire, originally Jamamarian, but separated when the demon Vanson was summoned and the rest of the Credelis sector had been cut off from the home realm. This war ended with the Ancient Empire joining the realms as a semi-autonomous collective realm, with their gods, the Scriptorum, dead or fled from the divine guardians of the realm. This also sees the discovery and claiming of the Ego Nebula and its many self-contained star systems, along with the creation of the Cognati and the Praetor races. And with this brief overview of both the ages of Jamamar and a little bit of an in-depth look at the calendar and timekeeping of the realms, I want to thank you all for your time and your attention. It does mean so very, very much. Now, until your next visit to the library, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other.